Hi folks, Thinking Slow here. So we're going to do a quick episode about the massive protests in Holland by the Dutch farmers, trying to explain a little bit what all that is about, and maybe more importantly explain that should also be happening in the UK, because the sort of environmental driven plans for the UK are much more severe than they are for Holland. And it's a bit surprising that the UK sector also is not up in arms. So those are the things we'll look at. So also I'd like to thank the people that have signed up to Patreon. We've got a few more subscribers in the last week or so. If you've enjoyed the interviews or the work we've done, that does take quite a bit of effort to research, would very much welcome new supporters on Patreon, and this is the address. So if it's something you're thinking about getting around to one day, put this on pause and take the 5 minutes to help us out on Patreon. Would be much appreciated. So getting on with this, what's going on in Holland and what may go on in the UK. So again, this is all links back to climate policies, and we did in February quite a in-depth film about net zero. We called it Gulag Net Zero because it regulates every single aspect of life. And we did a little section in there about farming, but that's what we're going to focus on right now, because that is behind a lot of the disruption in the food sector. So let's move to the situation then in Holland. If you've been watching Twitter, because this hasn't been covered anywhere in the mainstream news, you will have seen the massive protest by the Dutch farmers, and it's quite a long case, I think, what has sparked this, but basically it boils down to European nitrogen quotas. And this is one document from the European Union where you can see the Netherlands here is the second highest. This is the concentration of nitrogen per hectare of utilized area. And there's good reason for that. Netherlands is quite small, and it's the sixth largest agriculture export in the world. So inevitably it's going to have high intensity farming given a relatively small area. So this shouldn't be a surprise to anyone. And what's happened in this case is the local authorities regional authorities in Holland have authorized the use of nitrogen on grazing areas. And a group of environmental activists have challenged those decisions of the local executive, and the case was eventually referred up to Luxembourg, and in Luxembourg they decided that no, it's not possible to hand out those permits. So that has been that program has been cancelled, and that's the beginning of the trigger for these protests, because that just led recently in June to the Minister of Nature, who's Christian van der Waal, and the Minister of Farming, Henk Staghouwer, if I've got that right, to basically say that yes, we need to meet these nitrogen targets, and if in the process a whole bunch of farms need to be closed down, then so be it. And this is the sort of Marie Antoinette kind of attitude of many in the bureaucracy, which is a very heavy-handed, targets-based approach to achieving the targets that they've set. Now, we're, as you may have guessed now, a little bit skeptical of these big government policies, which are based on modelling. They're based on the tyranny of the experts, and then they're based on an extremely heavy-handed approach, i.e. closing people's farms down if they've been farming for 2, 3, 4 generations, however long. These kind of farming practices have been around. I mean, essentially, certainly the manure side has been around hundreds, thousands of years. And then all of a sudden a sort of remote bureaucracy says you can't do this and we're going to close you down because we have a target. I think that has basically kicked off this explosion of protest now. And if anyone has any more insights on that, let me know. We are going to try and get hold of an expert to talk about this issue, but as of today, that's my understanding of really the history of what's going on here. So we're pitting heavy-handed bureaucracy working on abstract targets versus the livelihoods of several thousand Dutch farmers who have been having these farming practices for hundreds of years. And also this heavy-handed bureaucracy will, of course, if it gets its way, push up significantly the costs of meat for everybody around the world. So this is quite a big deal, and it's going to be interesting to see where it goes. If anything, the UK farmers should be even more up in arms than the Dutch farmers, because in Holland this is sort of slightly through the back door with a nitrogen target, but in the UK the 6 carbon budgets set very explicit targets for how much grazing land there's going to be and how much cropland there's going to be. And you can see that in this chart in the corner. This is the current situation, 2019 was the baseline, and then this is where the 6 carbon budget has planned in the tailwind scenario. And the tailwind scenario is the most optimistic of all, but you can see they're talking about a 70% reduction in permanent grassland, 53% on rough grazing, and 40% roughly on cropland. And in the process, the base case scenario is an increase in population to 73.6 million by 2050. So they assume growing population, but a massive cut in grassland for grazing. So more or less they're looking to wipe out beef and lamb farming if you look at this. So it's surprising that British farmers are not, or British farmers, English farmers in particular, are not more irate, because if you believe this, then the writing is on the wall for large sectors of the livestock farming industry in the UK. So that's the background, but that's not the cause of today's problem in the sector. So today's problem is essentially a problem of lack of personnel. So there's a big headline number from a sort of study that we had a look at, which is there's from a workforce of 4.1 million, there are 500,000 vacancies, and that covers everything. So that's sort of food generally. So who knows? Those are slightly macro numbers. You don't really know exactly how they were calculated, but there does seem to be a major shortage of staff in the agricultural sector and in food processing. And really the problem has been that that has come about in 2021 due to COVID and the new visa rules coming in for EU citizens from the 1st of January 2021, and the government has been quite slow to make sort of emergency provisions to get people over to work in the farming sector. And then this is just one example, which is pig farming, and these are quite sort of upsetting numbers in a way. This was at January 2020, 30,000 sows are out of production, so that's 10% of the breeding herd, according to the evidence presented to the Select Committee. And this is a very bad number. 35,000 pigs have been culled. There just aren't the people at the processing plants to deal with them. So this is pure waste. This is meat just being wasted. And that's very upsetting for everybody involved in this whole process, especially the farming side. And there's now 150,000 backlog of pigs on farms who can't go to processing because there are just not enough people there at the moment. So this has been the current problem, and you see a lot of stories and video clips of things being destroyed in the field and people being paid to destroy crops. That's not really what's happening. It's just there's not the people to deal with that. So crops are being lost and they're not even being planted now. So there's a lot of stories in this Select Committee report of people not planting because they know they don't have the workforce down the line to do the harvesting. So this is going to be a big hit, and of course it's much bigger because of Ukraine, which we will come on to. So Ukraine, I think everybody understands the issue with the gas prices, Now, not only is there a direct issue with the gas prices, but that actually feeds into the production of fertilizer. And in Europe now, essentially, it's not viable to make fertilizer which requires gas. Just can't compete with the US and other places that are making gas-based fertilizer. So not only do you lose all of that capacity, but you also then don't have the CO2, which is an important ingredient in the food sector. And this plant, CF Fertilizers, has been sort of shut, and then it's opened, and it got some government subsidies, and then this is one of the biggest in the UK, and now in June 2022, it's just been shut now again. And now again, it's not only the fertilizer, it's the CO2 that you're also losing, and the CO2 is an important byproduct that you need in meat processing, and it's just not there. And as well as that, you've got the loss of Russian exports and importantly Belarusian exports of fertilizer, so that'll be pushing up world prices. And again, that's a Western sanctions issue. That's not Russia withholding the supply. It's just being told you can't sell it because of sanctions. So that's another big leg of this problem, and that is all coming together essentially. So for the UK, you've got a sort of macro background which is against farming, I would say, certainly against livestock farming. We're very skeptical about that because the way the policy has been made has been very similar to COVID. So use models, you can basically put anything you like in there, generate fear through climate scenarios, and then massive government overreach and basically tyrannical rule of the experts. And it looks like, I mean, that was essentially the COVID response, and that looks like it's being replicated here in the attitude towards farming. So that plus the gas prices, the lack of fertilizer exports, the lack of CO2 coming from the closure of the fertilizer plant in the UK in Ince. Then you've got the lack of labour. Farming is in for a very hard time, and I think through the explanation you can decide for yourself how much of that is conspiracy and how much is cock-up. Certainly the attitude of the World Economic Forum, Davos oligarchy, that is the conspiracy part. The cock-up has been, for example, not being ready to understand how many seasonal workers can come in during COVID and can come in under the new rules and actually do something to fix that. So I would say that part of it was a cock-up, but the policy stance is conspiracy. They have the farming sector, particularly livestock, in their crosshairs, and like in other areas they're pursuing, they don't really care what collateral damage they cause. So I hope you found this interesting. We'll have an expert who knows this much better than we do. This is based on desk research, but we'll try and get someone from the front line to talk in more detail. Okay, thanks. Bye.